Kennedy was just a toddler when tragedy struck and she lost both of her parents in a devastating plane crash. With her world shattered, she found herself placed in the confines of an orphanage. Initially, the red-haired girl resembled a wisp of snow, with her porcelain skin and a tiny, upturned nose. She scarcely uttered a word to anyone, shunned meals, and sought refuge beneath the stairs, a silent, withdrawn figure. Mrs. Rivera, a child psychologist, faced a daunting challenge in trying to reach out to this fragile child. She empathized deeply with Kennedy, understanding the immense emotional turmoil that a 5-year-old must endure when abruptly severed from the love and support of her family. One day, in a gesture of compassion, Mrs. Rivera beckoned Kennedy closer and presented her with a small teddy bear. "Meet Teddy," she gently introduced. "He'll be your dearest friend. If you ever find it hard to speak to me, just confide in Teddy. He'll convey everything to me later." Gratefully, Kennedy nodded and embraced her newfound companion. Over the following days, a transformation began to take shape. Mrs. Rivera encountered Kennedy in the hallway and inquired, "How are you feeling today?" She leaned in, attempting to establish a connection. Kennedy clung tightly to Teddy and turned away in silence. Mrs. Rivera persisted, understanding that Teddy was their intermediary. "So, you'd rather talk to Teddy about everything?" she asked kindly. Kennedy nodded and entrusted the stuffed bear to Mrs. Rivera. It might have seemed amusing to witness a grown woman conversing with a teddy bear, and Kennedy herself found it somewhat humorous. In that moment, a brief, heartfelt laugh escaped her lips, a sound that had been absent for too long. Gradually, Teddy continued to bridge the gap between them, but with each passing day, its role became less crucial. Kennedy blossomed, no longer reliant on her fuzzy confidant. She felt comfortable asking questions and sharing her innermost thoughts and secrets with the caring woman who had helped her find her voice once again. "Mrs. Rivera," Kennedy inquired one day, her gaze earnestly locked onto the woman's eyes, "where do the children from this orphanage go?" Mrs. Rivera responded with a warm smile, "They don't just go anywhere, dear. They find foster parents, sometimes they're distant relatives, and other times, they're complete strangers." Kennedy's eyes widened with hope, and she couldn't help but ask, "Could I become a foster child?" With genuine reassurance in her voice, Mrs. Rivera replied, "Of course, my dear. Someone out there will surely see how wonderful you are and choose to adopt you." Kennedy clapped her hands joyfully and hugged her treasured teddy bear tightly. The longing for a real family burned within her, and she yearned for the simple joys of attending school and walking with her parents. Perhaps they would even get her a dog for weekend adventures. Kennedy envisioned herself lovingly caring for it, feeding it, and even giving it baths. Time passed, and Kennedy's hope began to wane as no prospective parents came forward. Just when she was on the brink of despair, Mrs. Rivera approached her with an encouraging message. "Kennedy, there's a lady here who would like to meet you." The girl looked toward the door in astonishment, clutching her teddy bear and straightening her bows in anticipation. In walked a well-dressed woman, her beautiful, long hair neatly tied up in a high bun. She drew nearer with a warm smile and playfully asked, "Are you the most beautiful girl in the world?" Kennedy's heart swelled with happiness, knowing that this unfamiliar woman took an interest in her. From behind her tutor skirt, Kennedy regarded the woman with genuine curiosity and a budding sense of hope. "Beautiful and unassuming, may I be your friend?" Reagan gently asked, introducing herself. "I'm a friend of your parents, and my name is Reagan." Upon hearing about her parents, the girl emerged from her hiding spot and cautiously approached. "Did you know my parents?" she inquired with a hopeful look in her eyes. "Yes," Reagan replied with a heavy sigh, a hint of sadness in her voice. "I was a friend of your mother's." She reached into a bag she had brought along and handed Kennedy a generous assortment of candies and fruits. "They would be so proud of you here. This is for you." Kennedy accepted the gift and examined its contents with curiosity. Then, Reagan asked, can I come to visit sometimes? Kennedy hesitated for a moment and then nodded. I guess so. After their brief interaction, Mrs. Rivera summoned Reagan, and they left to have a private conversation. Left alone, Kennedy returned to her room. Later, when her tutor had a free moment, she called Kennedy to talk. This is a kind woman, Mrs. Rivera explained. She'll be coming to see you from time to time. I hope you don't mind. Kennedy, looking up with concern, asked, She's not going to be my mother, is she? Mrs. Rivera gently leaned in and replied, I don't know for sure, sweetheart, but we'll make sure everything is all right. Kennedy buried her face in her lap and burst into tears. They promised to take me away, she sobbed. I don't want to stay here anymore. Mrs. Rivera tried to console her, though her own heart ached. Reagan continued to visit, but her visits became irregular. Sometimes she disappeared for weeks at a time, leaving Kennedy to wonder. Then, after one long absence, she returned and had an extended conversation with the orphanage director. Kennedy, gradually getting accustomed to the unpredictability of it all, began to accept the ebb and flow of Reagan's presence in her life. They either never show up or they come to finalize adoption paperwork, the orphanage director expressed with frustration. Don't let the poor girls suffer. I understand, Reagan replied somberly, her voice heavy with regret. But I can't take Kennedy. At that moment, as the discussion unfolded behind closed doors, Kennedy wandered down the hallway and spotted her friend. She abruptly stopped and, overcome by emotions, sought refuge behind a nearby door. Eavesdropping on their conversation, she listened until she could bear it no longer. Bursting into the office, she cried out loudly, tears streaming down her face, Don't come back in here. I don't want to see you. Reagan sighed heavily, leaving some gifts for the girl, and then walked away, never to return. Kennedy celebrated her 6th birthday, and hope finally dawned as a young, childless couple took a keen interest in her. When they adopted Kennedy, she could hardly believe it when they shared the news about her new family. Emotions ran high as everyone at the orphanage bid farewell to Kennedy when she stood at the entrance with a small backpack. Mrs. Rivera, deeply attached to the girl, was particularly heartbroken. As Kennedy approached her, she offered a teddy bear and said, Here, take it. Let Teddy watch over you here in my absence. Tears welled up in Mrs. Rivera's eyes as she accepted the gift. That evening, in her new room, the little girl gazed around in disbelief, overwhelmed that her dream had finally come true. The foster family proved to be loving and caring. Morgan worked as a high school math teacher, while Austin pursued a career as an engineer. With time, Kennedy began to adapt to her new life with her new parents. Kennedy quickly formed a close bond with Austin and affectionately referred to him as Daddy. However, she remained somewhat wary of Morgan. Throughout their time together, Kennedy rarely cracked a smile in Morgan's presence. She addressed Morgan by her name and always looked down when spoken to by her. On the contrary, Kennedy's connection with Austin deepened rapidly. Austin took on the role of a doting father figure, frequently taking Kennedy to the park, surprising her with toys and sweets. In the evenings, Morgan would often cry and confide in her husband, expressing her struggle to be a real mother to Kennedy. The little girl seemed to pay her no mind, but appearances were deceiving. Kennedy was merely guarded, afraid to become too attached. She held a lingering fear that everything might vanish overnight. Kennedy also faced challenges when interacting with her peers. She found them too childlike, and despite her young age, her solemn blue eyes conveyed a sense of wisdom and life experience beyond her years. Austin, noticing her isolation, asked, Why aren't you playing with the other children? Kennedy responded with a shrug and a touch of disdain, They're a bunch of complainers and nerds, rubbing her small, upturned nose. Austin gently admonished her, That's not a kind way to talk. You won't make friends that way. The next day, Kennedy encountered a neighbor girl named Aria. They struck up a friendship quickly, but their camaraderie was soon disrupted by the arrival of a boy from the neighborhood, Jason. Jason, whose parents were well off and doted on him, entered their lives, changing the dynamic between Kennedy and Aria. Their parents were often preoccupied, leaving the boys in the care of their nanny. One day, while the girls were playing together, Jason approached them, curious about their activities. "What are you doing?" he inquired as he drew nearer. Aria replied with enthusiasm, "We're playing mommy and daughter." The boy scrutinized the girls' toys and impulsively grabbed one of Aria's dolls, attempting to make a quick getaway. However, he didn't get far before Kennedy caught up to him. With determination, she tackled him to the ground, retrieved the doll, and handed it back to her friend. Firmly, she asserted, "It's not yours. Give it back." Jason's nanny reacted strongly to the incident, scolding Kennedy sharply. "How dare you? You nearly hurt that child. If you don't know how to play with other children, stay away from the playground," she chastised, arrogantly escorting Jason home. Undeterred by the incident, Kennedy returned to the playground the next day to play with Aria once more. Their friendship blossomed, and from then on, they became inseparable. Jason observed from a distance how much fun the girls were having but remained apprehensive about approaching them, as per his nanny's instructions. Despite obeying, he harbored a grudge against Kennedy and silently vowed to seek revenge someday. That day eventually arrived when Kennedy started school for the first time, dressed in a crisp white blouse, a black skirt, and a beautiful backpack adorned with Mickey Mouse. Austin, eager to make the day special, took her to a toy store. "You're such a big girl now, going to school. Let's pick something out for you," he suggested with a warm smile. "You can choose anything you'd like," Austin encouraged, gently setting Kennedy down and releasing her hand. Surrounded by an array of toys, Kennedy felt a bit overwhelmed. She began strolling down one of the store's aisles, contemplating her options. As Kennedy wandered, she unexpectedly crossed paths with Jason and his mother. The woman was engaged in a phone call, guiding her son by the hand. They were on their way to a birthday party and had stopped by the store to pick out a gift, lingering near a display case. With her attention focused on the phone call, Jason's mother released his hand. In that moment, he seized the opportunity and swiftly snatched an expensive robot transformer from the shelf. He slyly winked at Kennedy and concealed the stolen toy beneath his jacket. While Kennedy was taken aback by Jason's theft, she decided it wasn't her place to intervene. She continued shopping with her father, moving to another section of the store. Together, Kennedy and her father selected an elegant Barbie doll, and they proceeded to the checkout line. As they waited, Jason and his mother joined the queue behind them. The woman remained engrossed in her phone conversation, clutching a large box beneath her arm. Austin and Kennedy completed their purchase, but their exit from the store was accompanied by an unsettling signal. "Please return to the store," one of the security guards called out to them. Austin and Kennedy exchanged puzzled glances. "Kindly show us the contents of your backpack," the second guard requested. Kennedy shrugged her shoulders and complied, opening her backpack. To her astonishment, she discovered a box containing the very same robot that Jason had concealed under his jacket. Kennedy shot an indignant look at Jason, who responded with a mischievous grin. "It's not mine," he retorted, feigning innocence. "It was him," Kennedy exclaimed, pointing accusingly at Jason. Finally, Jason's mother ended her phone call and turned her attention to the unfolding situation. "What's going on? On what basis are you accusing these respectable people?" she demanded. "My son would never take something that doesn't belong to him. He can have anything he wants. You should be ashamed." Undeterred, Kennedy fired back, "Before you criticize someone from an orphanage, maybe you should check the backgrounds of your own family. Your son is the thief, and I saw him on the security cameras hiding that robot under his jacket." The woman was taken aback, and she grabbed Jason's hand as they hastily exited the store, leaving a wake of astonished onlookers. In their eyes, Kennedy's courage in standing up to the rude, wealthy woman was truly admirable. Several years passed, and Kennedy was on the verge of completing her final year of school, preparing for exams. She had excelled academically and even secured a part-time job during the summer. Morgan and Austin felt immense pride in their daughter's achievements. Kennedy had her sights set on college, with grand plans for her future, but first, she had exams and graduation to conquer. One day, Kennedy and her best friend, Aria, decided to go shopping to choose dresses for their upcoming prom. They strolled through the streets, enjoying ice cream, sharing laughter, and admiring the dresses displayed in the windows of a boutique. Kennedy suggested, "Shall we go inside?" Aria agreed, and both girls entered the store, eager to explore the array of dresses. They became so engrossed in trying on different outfits that they unintentionally created a bit of commotion, drawing the attention of a saleswoman who had been engaged in a quiet conversation with a tall blonde man. In a somewhat haughty tone, the saleswoman approached them, saying, "Could you please lower your voices and refrain from handling the merchandise? It's unlikely you'll be making any purchases here." Undeterred, Kennedy replied, "And why not?" She glanced at the price tags, realizing that the dresses were indeed quite expensive. The saleswoman proceeded to take the dresses from the girls and casually hung them back on their racks. She then instructed, "Wrap up both dresses." Suddenly, a woman who had been standing nearby intervened, saying, "Yes, I'll pay for them." The saleswoman was taken aback, but when she saw the woman's credit card, she began packaging the dresses. After the payment was complete, the woman handed the dresses to the astonished girls and extended an invitation for coffee. Kennedy was surprised when the woman addressed her by name. Upon closer inspection, she recognized her as Reagan, the woman who had visited her at the orphanage. It turned out that Reagan was not only a close friend of Kennedy's mother but also a part-time lawyer. Unfortunately, Reagan couldn't adopt Kennedy due to her serious health issues. However, Kennedy's biological parents had left her a substantial inheritance. "Well, you see, all the details are in that envelope," Reagan explained. "At least now, you'll have some financial security." With those words, she bid farewell and walked away. Kennedy struggled to process this newfound information. For the most part, she felt content with her life as it was. It wasn't the wealth that mattered to her. She possessed something far more valuable, the love of parents who had been touched by the events that had unfolded in her life. Overwhelmed by gratitude and emotion, Kennedy dialed a familiar number and brought the phone to her ear. "Hello," came the voice on the other end. "Morgan, do you know how much I love you?" Kennedy said, her voice trembling with sincerity. "You're the best mom in the world."